All right, welcome to our first lesson in text mining for education. This is the very first task we're going to be doing in Unit 1 for Part 2. And pretty much the goal of this lesson is to get us set up with R in RStudio and get some very introductory practice to doing some coding in R and getting familiar with the environment. So you can see over here that I have both of the texts that we're going to be drawing from a lot from this course. We've got the introduction, the R for data science, and we also have the text mining with R book. Both of these, again, are available online for free. The links are in the syllabus. And like I said, we're going to be using these quite a bit. But right now I'm in the introduction of R for data science, and I'm under prerequisites. And this is going to show us where to locate the downloads for both R and RStudio. And I'm going to slide over to my Windows version so you can see what it looks like from setting it up for scratch. So now you can see I'm over here in Windows. On this partition of my computer, I don't have R or RStudio installed, so I'm going to be doing this from scratch. So I'm on a Windows machine in theory right now, so I'm going to download R for Windows, and we want to download R before we download RStudio. So let's go ahead and download that. All right, and I'm installing R for the first time, so I'll go ahead and click that. You can see it's downloading down here now. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up this file. Yes, I do want to run it. All right, going through the menu options. This should be relatively quick. That's a good place to put it. So I'm just going to go with the default. Next. No, I don't want to customize any startup options. Yep, that'll work. And I'm just going to go with all the defaults here. So we've got that downloaded. We have R downloaded now. We have it installed on our computer. So let's go ahead and open that up. All right, so I'm going to go into my programs. I've got R right there. I'm going to go ahead and open up the 64-bit version of this. And as you can see right now, this is what it looks like on a Windows machine. And this thing right here is called the R console. And this is where you're going to enter all of your commands for R. We could use the console as a very basic calculator if we wanted to. So for example, let's say 3 plus 4, it's going to give us, 3 plus 7, it's going to give us 10. Something neat about R that we can do with it is we can take those things that we've, calculations or whatever they happen to be, and we can store those calculations as an object in R. So we could use that object later and don't have to type all the things that we typed before. So let's say we wanted to store 3 plus 7 as a variable x. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to type in x, and I'm going to do the little less than sign and the dash to make an arrow, and that's called the assignment operator. And what that is going to do is it's going to take whatever we type to the right of it. It's going to take whatever we type to the right of it, and it's going to store it as an object called x. So let's go ahead and hit enter, and now it's in our computer. We don't see it right here. When we get into RStudio, it's going to be a little bit easier to see all the objects that you created, but we know it's there because if we type x, we're going to get 10 there, so we stored it there. So that's one way we can assign it. In R, there is another way to assign your calculations or functions or the data that you read in from whatever files. There's a way to store it using the equal sign. So let's say I wanted to make a W, and I wanted to do 3 plus 4 for W. I want to store it as W, so we can use the equal sign. Now when I do W, I've got the answer 7 there. Oops. Sorry about that. You can also use the arrow keys, as you weren't able to see, but you can use the arrow keys to bring up past commands that you typed. But you can see that we can use the little equal sign to store things as objects, or this arrow. This little left arrow here is much more conventional, though we don't use that very often to store things as objects. So that's the R console right there. One other thing you can do in base R is you can create a script. All right, and then what this allows you to do basically is to all the code that you would type in, all the analyses that you would do, you can type it in here first. And then that way you have a record of all of the code that you've typed. So that's the introduction to R Basic. Like I said, we are not going to be using the base R application. We're going to be using something called RStudio instead. And that's going to allow us to use the console. It's going to give us a little script editor so we can save all of our code. But it does a lot more. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I'm not going to save any of this. And what we're going to do next is go ahead and install RStudio. All right, so we've got R installed. Like I said before, we're not going to be using R. We're going to be using RStudio instead. And as you can see from this image below, it has the console just like R, but it has some other features as well. They're going to be very useful to us and make things a lot easier. It also adds a little bit of a point-and-click interface to R2, so it's a little bit more intuitive on how to load files, view your working directory, see the objects that you created, etc. So let's go ahead and open up this RStudio download link. And that's going to take us to RStudio. All right, so you can see we have many different versions here. We're just going to be using the RStudio desktop for the free version, which gives us everything that we need. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and install this. As you can see, on this particular part of my machine, I'm actually in Windows here, so I'm going to go ahead and install the RStudio for Windows. Go ahead and download that. You can see it's downloading. All right, I'm going to open it up. All right, and just like R, I'm going to go through the setup here. All right, so we got RStudio downloaded and installed. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. All right, so now that we have RStudio downloaded and installed, let's go ahead and open that up. Go to my Programs menu. I'm going to go to RStudio. Open up RStudio. And there we go. I have to apologize. I think this is because I'm running Windows on my Mac machine. This font and everything is very tiny. But I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my Mac from this point on in the course. All right, so we've got R downloaded. We've got RStudio downloaded. From this point forward, I'm going to be on my Mac just using RStudio on my Mac. From this point in the course, too, we're pretty much only going to be using RStudio, which again has all the features of R, but it has some additional features as well that let us do more things. So the very first thing I recommend that we do before we get really deep into the course is that we create a project for this course. It's called an R project. And this is going to allow us to designate where all our files are going to be. It's going to set our working directory. It's also going to be able to store some of the things that we've been doing, and it's going to just collect it all into one place. So if you click on this little icon up here, we're going to create a new project, and we're going to create it in a new directory. We're going to do an R project. and you're going to name it whatever you want to. I'll just do an example here and call this test project, or actually I'll just call it TM course. I'll put it on my desktop for now, that's fine. And I'm going to go ahead and create this project. And there we go. So I got a brand new setup now. As you can see right now, if you go down here to this little workspace, this right here is going to show you your directory. So right now, this course, or this project, it lives on my desktop. And the project itself is called TM course. All right. I'm going to give you a quick kind of overview of the different areas of RStudio. This is going to look familiar. This is your console. So again, we can type in commands here, do a quick little addition, use it as a calculator. Or again, we can store things in objects. 3 plus 4. And there we go. One of the things you're going to notice that's a little bit different now is that those objects that we stored, we can now see them in our environment up here. So we know that we've created an object called X. We know it's a numeric variable, and it's the value of it equals 7. So that's one of the nice features of RStudio. If you ever decide to change your directory, you can go ahead and do that here, but I would just keep it wherever you stored your project. And from this point forward, too, we'll probably keep all of our files there. All right, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new R script. So if you go up in the left-hand corner here, you can create different types of files. We've got R scripts, we've got notebooks, we have Markdown. We'll be using that later in the course. We can create other things as well, presentations, documentations, but for most of the course we're going to be focused on just a place to store the code that we're writing. So let's go ahead and open up our script. And now you can see we have 4 panes in our RStudio environment. We have our console down here for executing commands that we type. We have our workspace area over here. This has our files, has our working directory where we store all of our files. Also, if we make any graphs or charts, it's going to show up here in plots. Packages, we're going to talk about in just a little bit. These are packages, things you can install for R to get new commands. Again, we'll talk about those in a little bit. This help feature is extremely useful. This is going to give you information about a lot of the things we're doing in the course. And then we have our viewer as well. So let's just go back to files so we know where we are. All right, so now that we've created our first R script, let's go ahead and add some code to our script. Let's reproduce what we made before. Let's take our, we'll just create a new object called W, and we'll go ahead and assign, let's see, 5 times 2 to W. And we have a couple options now for running this. One, we can go ahead and copy it and paste it into our console. And there we go. So now we have an object. It's called W. It's a numeric object with a value of 10. All right. So that's one way we can run this. Another way, if you're on a Mac, you can hold down the command and then hit enter. And then that's going to send it to your console. So that's another way to do it. And then another way, if you want to do some point and click, you can just go to the line that you want and hit run. And then that's going to run that line of code. And then let's see, it's going to run that line of code and everything afterwards until it hits a break. And in our case, the break was the next line. So we've written our first piece of code on our script. Let's go ahead and save this now. So we can do the standard Control S, Command S if you're on a Mac and save it, or we can just click the little save thing. All right, and it's going to ask us where we want to save this. By default, it's going to save it in the project that we created. So on our desktop, it created a folder for us. It's a project folder called TM Course. And it's going to go ahead and just by default, it's going to save it there. And going to go ahead and save this just for, since this is just a test file, I'm just going to go ahead and save it as S. You might want to save it as something else. So we'll go ahead and save it. Now you can see up here it's called test.r. That R means it's an R file. And now you can see that it showed up in our directory as well. So now we have our project here, our TM course project, our R project, and our test file right there as well. All right, so as you can see, we've created a couple numeric objects here. We've got W, which has a value of 10. We've got X, which has a value of 7. But we can also create text objects, character objects. So if we wanted to store a string of text, or if we wanted to store a name or something like that, we can also do that. So let's actually go ahead and store something called my name. And we have that assignment operator, so that's going to assign whatever's to the right of this over to my name. As you can see, it's coming up with an error code right now, or a little error indicator right there, because it's saying there's nothing that's being assigned to my name. So let's go ahead and assign something to it. I'm going to hit Shift. I'm going to use some quotes. When we create strings or character objects, we're going to put them in quotes. So let's say Sean Kellogg. And we're going to assign Sean Kellogg to my name. So let's go ahead and run this. There we go. All right, so as you can see over here in our little environment here, we have a new object. It's called my name. It's a character, and the value of it is Sean Kellogg. All right, so we've written a few lines of code already. One other thing we can do in our R script is we can create some annotations. And what we do when we're creating some comments or annotations is just indicating just some reference text for ourselves or others who are reading it, some information about the code that we've written. And the way to do that is typing in this little hash sign right there, and then anything that you type after that, it's going to recognize that that is not in fact code. It's just some personal notes you're making to yourself or for others. So I'll just say, just for my own personal reference, my first lines of code. And now I have an actual annotation there of what's going on, what this code is. So one other neat little trick I want to show you with respect to annotation is, so we can use our hash, little hash symbol there, and write some notes about what our code is, and that's just for personal reference, and it recognizes that that's not code. One other thing that we can do is add 4 dashed lines afterwards. And what that does is, it's actually kind of a neat little useful tool, and what that does is it creates basically headers for your code. So if I click over here, I can see that it created a basically a header, basically a bookmark for this code. So let's say I wanted to create, let's say I wanted to create just a title for this. I'll just call it, let's say, Lesson 1. And there we go. So now I have over here a little header, and I can just jump straight to that area of code related to Lesson 1. This is useful if you are writing some pretty big R files and if you're doing like an extensive analysis. So for example, here's an example of code that I had written for doing an analysis for a one-to-one evaluation in Tennessee, where I was comparing two groups that had participated in a one-to-one program effectively, one that had participated, one that hadn't, and we did some propensity score matching. And then over here, since this was a pretty lengthy file, I went over and I had just kind of summaries of where everything, my code was specific to those things. All right, so we've gotten a little practice with just writing our first lines of code. We've done a basic operation, created a numeric object called W. We created a character object, a text object called my name. And now let's get a little practice with our very first function. So a function is kind of like a command. It's calling upon R to do something to whatever you feed the function. But let me give you an example. Let's call this, we're going to create a line of text. Let's call it text. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a very simple function in R called combine. It's a very generic, general function. If you look over here in the help file, I'm going to type C. This is called the combine function. It's going to combine values into a vector or a list of things. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to create, use our first function, our combine function C, to create some text. And what we're going to do is create a little poem here. So I'm going to actually go over to my text mining in R book. And under the preface, under chapter 1, text, the tidy text format, I'm going to go ahead and copy this 4 lines, this little poem by Emily Dickinson. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back to my R file. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in here. Oh, I thought it was. There we go. All right, so as you can see, you might have remembered before, we put quotations around a string of text that we want to use. So here is one string of text. What this does over here, this little comma separates one line of the poem from the next line. So we have another string right there, line number 3 here, and our final line right there. So we've got our C function, we've told it the things that we want it to combine together, and we've told it we want to store that into an object called text. So let's go ahead and run this. Select this bit of code, and I'm going to say just run what's selected. There we go. So as you can see over here, what we've done is we've created a new character object. This is a character vector. It has 4 lines here, so it's a length of 4. And what we can do is we can go ahead and call that up. So let's call our text object. So that's what we just created. Let's run that. Click run here, and then it's going to show us what the object consists of. All right, before we go much further, let's go ahead and annotate this code so we know what this is all about. So I'm going to add a hashtag here. Let's say my first functions. I do a little dash 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 here. I'm going to add a new little annotation here. I'm going to call this the combine function. And just for my own personal reference, you don't have to do this, but I'm just going to have it in the outline here so I can always go back to it when I need to. My first function, lesson 1, combine function. Just want to show you something else. So the combine function, obviously it works with strings of text, but you can combine other things too. Let's say I wanted to create an object called my numbers. Oops. And there's my assignment operator, so I can assign my numbers. I'm going to do a little combination here. I'm going to create a sequence of numbers, 1, 6, 1, 6, just random numbers here, 10. Then I'm going to combine those numbers into a numeric vector called my numbers. There we go. So you can see my numbers is up there. Again, it's got a length of 4 because it's 4 unique numeric values there. Let's go here and call up my numbers. As you can see, RStudio is pretty smart. It's going to say, is that what you're looking for? That sure is. I'm going to go ahead and do command and return, and then it's going to show them right there. So there's my numbers. I'm going to show them the console. Let's call up text. That was another object that we had just created. Shows up there, down in the console. There's some other ways you can view these things. Let's say I wanted to do print, and I wanted to print the text object that I created. I can go ahead and I can run that, and it basically does the exact same thing of just typing the name of the objects in there. One other thing that might be of interest is there's a function called view, and this allows you to view up here in the pane here some objects that you created. So let's view text. All right, that's going to show up there. It's going to look like a more traditional kind of spreadsheet format. And let's view my numbers. Go ahead and view that. There we go. All right, and just as a reminder, if you ever have any questions about some of these functions that we're using and what they're about and how they work, you can always go to the Help tab over here and then search for the name of the function. Let's, for example, look at print. All right, so this prints values. All right, so we demonstrated how that works. One nice thing about the little help feature here is if you go to the bottom, it will go ahead and show you examples of using that particular function. So let's use the C function again as an example. This is the combine function where we combine things together. Here's some examples down here. We can combine, let's just test this out just for fun. Go up here to our combine functions section, just paste that in, and go ahead and add it. We didn't assign it to any particular object name, so it's not going to show up over here. So we haven't saved it in our workspace here, but it does show up down here. So this includes the values of number 1. It also includes values 7, 8, and 9. So again, when you're using the help package, or I'm sorry, the little help menu here, you can search for functions that you're using, and then you can also scroll to the bottom and it'll give you examples of how those functions are used. All right, so now that we have some of the basics down, let's go ahead and we're going to learn a new function. So we've learned about the combine function. We've learned about print and view functions. We've learned how to show some of the objects that we've created either by typing their name or through printing and viewing. And now we're going to learn a new function that's going to be useful to us throughout the course. It's called install packages. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to install some packages that the R community has created for doing various sorts of things. The first one we're going to install is called swirl. So we have now installed swirl among our packages. So let's go to packages. We should be able to find it here. You can see that it's been installed down here and downloaded. And if we scroll down to our packages, I've got a lot of them here, probably many more than you have currently. And I've actually deleted quite a few, but there it is, swirl. So click on that. It's going to take us to the documentation pages for swirl. You can see a lot of stuff in here. Our first command, our first function from the swirl package that we're going to learn is actually just called swirl, and that's for starting a swirl course. So I have installed the swirl package. There it is down there. Another way I could have installed it, actually, if I didn't want to type in the command over here in my script and then load it into the console, is I could have actually just clicked install here and then searched for swirl among the package repository. But I've already installed it, so that's one way I could have done it. I just wrote it in here on my R script, so I have reference to it later down the road. So before we actually begin using swirl, just a little quick background. This is going to be included in the link under lesson 1 in our course site. If you want to learn more about swirl, there's information on the swirlstats.com page. You can go to learn, and it'll give you instructions on how to set this up, although I just walked you through that. There's the instructions for installing the packages, which we've just done. And now we're going to pay attention to this. This is actually starting the swirl course. So let's go back to RStudio. So we have installed the package, but we can't use the package yet. Before we use the package, we actually have to load it. And one way to do that is either through this task pane right here. So we can just go down to swirl, getting there it is. And we can just click on it and that will load it. But again, we want to keep a record of everything we're doing. So let's go ahead and load it from the console. I'm going to type in library. This is going to be a little different. So here we included the name of the package in parentheses. Once the package is loaded, we just have to type the name of the package because now it's already in RStudio. So there we go. Let's run that line of code. And now the package swirl is loaded, and you can see it's checked off over here too. So now we know the package is loaded, and we can go ahead and start running it. So again, let's go to swirl. Let's go to our very first command that we're going to use. Our first function is just called swirl. Let's go ahead and run that first function, swirl parentheses, load, and it's going to start asking you for some information to get you ready for the course. So what shall I call you? You can go ahead and call me by my first name. All right, when we see these little 3 dots down here, that's our cue to press enter. So we can do it down here in the console, or we can do it up here. There we go, so I hit enter. All right, select 1, 2, or 3, press enter. All right, it looks like all those options are pretty much the same. I'm going to push 1 up here, and I'm going to run this. Again, just for my own purposes, you might want to do this too, but I'm going to keep a record in my R script of everything I've done. All right, it's going to give you some information. You can exit swirl by return to the R prompt at any time by pressing the escape key, etc., etc., etc. All right, let's keep going. All right, the first course that we're going to be doing for lesson 1 is called R programming, the basics of R programming. So let's type in our selection. Here, I'll type it in down here this time. All right, and we want selection 1. And we are going to be working for our very first swirl tutorial on lesson number 1, basic building blocks. So I'll just run this one again. There we go. So in this lesson, we're going to explore some basic building blocks of the R programming language. We've got that ... that just means hit enter, etc., etc. All right, and this is going to run you through some stuff I've already introduced to you. So if we type 5, oops, again, I'm going to keep a record of everything I do. So 5 plus 7. Go ahead and run that. There we go. If you type it in correctly or if you enter the wrong answer, it's going to let you know, and it'll give you some feedback, and it'll ask you to try again. If you have trouble and you're struggling, you keep getting the wrong answer, don't worry, it'll prompt you with the correct response. All right, let's keep going. I'm going to do a couple more, and then you're going to be on your own for this. All right, so there we go. It's telling us about the assignment operator, which we've already learned about. All right, so now what we're going to do is take that 5 plus 7, and we are going to assign it to a variable called x. 5 plus 7. I'll do it wrong the first time just so you can see what it looks like. Oh, it says I'm close, but not quite right. Let me try this again. All right, x, assignment, assign it to x, run, there we go. All right, so the remainder of this lesson you're going to go ahead and complete on your own. After you get this done completed, there's going to be one more introductory swirl tutorial that we're going to go through, and that's going to be the end of lesson 1. So at this point, you have hopefully completed lesson number 1, basic building blocks of the R programming swirl course. What we're going to be doing next is one final tutorial course that I think is going to be very useful for you all. So this is another introductory R swirl course. And this can be found, it's going to be linked on lesson 1 of our course site, but it can also be found on the swirlstats.com page. And to install this course, which is not currently installed in Swirl, we're going to use a new function. from the swirl package. It's called install course. We're actually just going to go ahead and make this easy and copy this other course that we want to install. Let's copy that. We're going to go ahead and install this new swirl course. And I'm going to select this, and I'm going to run that. And hooray, course has been installed successfully. So again, if we remember correctly, to load swirl, we type in the swirl command. And again, you have to make sure that the package swirl has been loaded. If it's not loaded, if you don't see it checked off over here, either make sure you load it by calling library, or go ahead and just check it over here. So let's run swirl again. We're going to get that started. All right, it's going to ask us our name again. I've already typed that up here, so I'll just use that. It's asking me if I want to do the R Programming Basic Building Blocks course. So if it wants me to pick up where I left off, I'm going to say no. You all have probably finished that, so it may not ask you that, but I went through and reinstalled it and have not finished that, so I'm going to say no. Take me to a different one. There we go. Here's our very short introduction to R that we just installed. Well, let's type 1. There's a zip file here. Just ignore that. We're going to go straight to module 1. So let's go ahead and type in number 2. All right, and again, you're going to get some introductory text. It's going to tell you about all this information, where you can download some of the other things from her GitHub account. Let's go ahead and keep moving. Warning about the course being brand new and may contain errors. Get started. Oh, it's going to give you some information about RStudio. That's nice. All right, keep going. I recommend you don't skip through all this. I'm just skipping through this just for instructional purposes. All right, etc., 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 etc. Keep going. All right, let's get started with the real programming. Let's do it. All right, so again, very similar. R can be used as a calculator. She gives a little bit more of a complex calculation here. 10 2 plus 36. All right, we got it correct. All right, so now it's going to ask us compute the difference between 2017. Apparently this program, this course is a couple years old. Compute the difference between 2017 and the year you started at the university, divided by the difference between 2017 and the year you were born. Multiply this by 100, and we will get the percentage of our life that we have spent at this university. Whew. Oh my goodness, that is a pretty big chunk of my life. I've been here for a little bit too long. All right, so again, I'm not going to go through this entire course for you. I'll just go a little bit further just so you can get a sense of what the rest of this introductory course is like. You can also give numbers a name. By doing so, they become so-called variables, which can be used later. So for example, you can type in the command window a equals 4. Now remember, we had talked about earlier in this video that we typically use the arrow operator for assigning things to variables or to objects. Throughout this little tutorial, I think she uses the equal sign, but that's generally not typical. And actually, you'll notice, so we have a new object up here called A. As she's pointed out, some people prefer to use the arrow instead of the equal sign. Like she said, they do the same thing. And then, like we mentioned, like we showed before, you can see that actual objects that you created, like what it contains. So let's tell it to call up A. I'll keep it here just for my record. Run that. All right. And you can also do calculations with these objects that you created. So we can do A times 5, and there we go. All right, so I'm going to let you finish up the remainder of this tutorial. Make sure you complete the R Programming Basic Building Blocks tutorial as well. All of this information and all of the links is going to be lesson one on our course site, including a link to the swirl package, your required readings for the first lesson, and then finally I do have some additional recommended resources. You're not required to do these are just optional, but if you feel like you have the time and you want to strengthen some more of your skills, I definitely recommend viewing these videos, and then DataCamp also has a great introductory to R course as well. So that's the completion of lesson 1 for unit 1. This is going to be the longest lesson probably throughout the course because we're getting everybody up and started and running, and the lessons after this should be a little bit shorter. Looking forward to the remainder of the unit. If you have any problems or if you're running into any issues completing lesson 1, this lesson is actually created using a forum, so you can just start a new discussion and then type in the issue you're having. Let's say can't figure out swirl, and then type in whatever your issue is, lorem ipsum, blah, 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 etc. So again, you can use this for troubleshooting if you're having any issues, and either myself or someone else in our learning community will assist you.